By April 2026, the global economy was suffocating under the weight of a geopolitical chokehold. The Persian Gulf, a vital maritime artery responsible for the transit of roughly one-fifth of the world's oil supply and a massive percentage of its liquid natural gas, had been effectively paralyzed. The Islamic Republic of Iran, leveraging a decades-long strategy of asymmetric area denial, had sealed the Strait of Hormuz. At the absolute epicenter of this blockade lay Qeshm Island. Spanning nearly 600 square miles, Qeshm served as the ultimate unsinkable aircraft carrier for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. For weeks, a relentless campaign of precision aerial bombardment, known as Operation Epic Fury, had attempted to shatter the island's defensive infrastructure, significantly degrading Iran's ballistic launch capacity. Yet the airstrikes yielded diminishing returns. The true combat power of the Revolutionary Guard was not stationed on the sun-scorched surface, but buried hundreds of meters underground in deeply excavated, highly fortified tunnel networks known as missile cities. To break the blockade, air power was no longer sufficient. A direct, multi-domain ground intervention became the only remaining option, setting the stage for one of the most complex and hazardous joint military operations in modern history. High above the black expanse of the Persian Gulf, the drone of 4 heavy turbofan engines vibrated through the fuselage of a C-17 Globemaster. Inside the darkened cargo bay, the jumpmasters of the 82nd Airborne Division stared down the amber glow of the status lights. Following a sweeping structural reorganization in the mid-2020s, the division had been honed into an ultra-lethal, highly concentrated immediate response force. The paratroopers aboard the aircraft, specifically the 1st Brigade Combat Team, under the command of Major General Brandon Tegmeyer, were the absolute vanguard of the United States military, tasked with a near-impossible vertical insertion. Below them lay Qeshm Island, and the drop zone was a hostile nightmare. The island was defined by an irregular rocky coastline and a desolate, arid interior dominated by wind-eroded canyons and jagged, table-topped limestone hills, most notably the towering 1,331-foot peak of Kish Ku. The jumpmasters frantically calculated the mean effective wind using weather balloon telemetry, fighting the unpredictable wind shear generated where the dry desert thermals collided with the heavy, humid air rising off the strait. The light turned green. In a synchronized cascade, hundreds of paratroopers hurled themselves into the freezing slipstream, plunging into the abyss. As their canopies deployed with violent snaps, the paratroopers drifted downward through the darkness, their night vision devices painting the jagged ridges of Qeshm in stark monochrome green. The descent was perilous. They aggressively manipulated their risers to steer their parachutes away from sharp limestone outcroppings and deep ravines, aiming for the uneven rocky plateaus that overlooked the northern coastline. Hitting the ground with bone-jarring force, the airborne infantry immediately shed their harnesses and consolidated their combat power. As a light infantry force lacking heavy mechanized armor, their survival depended entirely on speed, violence of action, and the rapid seizure of the high ground. Their primary objective was to establish a secure perimeter overlooking the Clarence Strait. This incredibly narrow geographic moat separated Qeshm from the Iranian mainland and stood as the island's greatest vulnerability. The waterway was choked by the Hara Biosphere Reserve, a massive expanse of dense emerald mangrove forests that provided perfect natural camouflage for Revolutionary Guard reinforcements. The paratroopers knew that an unrelenting wave of Iranian infantry and fast attack craft would soon bleed out of those mangroves, attempting to overrun the airborne beachhead before the Americans could secure the island's airstrips to establish a vital resupply air bridge. While the airborne infantry rushed to emplace anti-tank guided missiles and heavy machine guns along the razor-sharp ridges overlooking the strait, a completely different and far more terrifying nightmare unfolded directly beneath their boots. Located in the southwestern sector of the island was the Namaqdan Salt Cave. Stretching for over 6.5 kilometers, it was the longest continuous salt cave system in the world. Formed over millions of years by diaporism, tectonic pressures had forced a massive dome of highly plastic rock salt up through the overlying sedimentary crust. For the Revolutionary Guard, this salt dome was the ultimate natural armor. Rock salt possessed incredible geomechanical resilience. Under immense pressure from deep penetrating bombs, the salt simply deformed and crept, absorbing massive seismic shock waves and naturally sealing its own microfractures. Hidden within this geological marvel was the true target of the invasion, a sprawling subterranean missile city. To neutralize this buried leviathan, a specialized element of Navy SEALs infiltrated the natural mouth of the Namakdan cave. The moment they stepped inside, they entered an alien, hostile world. The environmental conditions were instantly debilitating. The ambient temperature was suffocating, wrapped in crushing humidity levels that hovered near 82%. Corrosive, saturated brine streams pooled at their feet, threatening to degrade exposed electronics and weapon mechanisms. The floor of the cave was coated in a thick, jagged crust of crystalline halite. Every single footstep shattered the salt crystals with a loud, unavoidable crunch, instantly eliminating the possibility of a completely silent approach. Above them, the ceilings were adorned with fragile, twisting salt helictites and massive stalactites that looked like glass daggers, threatening to break loose at the slightest concussive shock. Navigating the salt dome required technologies bordering on science fiction. Plunging hundreds of meters underground meant that the global positioning system was entirely non-existent. Radio frequency signals from traditional navigation satellites could not penetrate the dense layers of bedrock and salt. To map the twisting, pitch-black labyrinth, the SEALs deployed autonomous micro-drones, agile first-person view quadcopters that flitted down the dark corridors to scout for booby traps and hidden sentries. The operators themselves carried handheld simultaneous localization and mapping devices integrated with light detection and ranging, or LiDAR. Because the deep cave existed in a state of absolute zero-photon darkness, traditional night vision goggles that relied on ambient starlight or moonlight were utterly useless. Instead, the SEALs viewed the world through their integrated visual augmentation system headsets, freshly integrated with advanced lattice software to autonomously detect and classify threats in real time. Enhanced by these artificial intelligence algorithms, their thermal microbolometers cut through the pitch black, highlighting the heat signatures of hidden ambushes and the residual warmth of subterranean machinery against the ambient background of the cavern. Back on the surface, the dark waters of the Clarence Strait suddenly erupted into chaos. The thermal optics of the airborne anti-armor teams detected the intense heat blooms of dozens of high-speed outboard motors tearing through the Hara mangrove forests. The Revolutionary Guard counterattack had begun. Swarms of low-profile fast-attack craft and troop transports surged across the narrow channel, attempting to establish a foothold on the northern beaches of Qeshm. The paratroopers opened fire, leveraging their dominant elevation advantage. A torrential downpour of heavy machine gun fire and tracer rounds streaked across the black water, reflecting off the surface of the Persian Gulf. Anti-tank guided missiles locked onto the heat signatures of the larger Iranian transport vessels, launching from the jagged ridgelines with deafening backblasts and plunging down into the strait in geysers of fire and boiling water. The 82nd Airborne transformed the shoreline into a lethal kill zone, desperately holding the perimeter to buy time for the incoming C-130 Hercules transport planes currently inbound to land on the island's captured runways. Deep beneath the artillery fire shaking the surface, the SEALs pushed further into the diapiric salt dome until the natural water-carved tunnels seamlessly transitioned into massive, artificially bored corridors lined with reinforced concrete. They had reached the perimeter of the missile city. The sheer scale of the underground infrastructure was staggering. The SEALs' thermal optics revealed extensive railway systems embedded into the tunnel floors, designed to rapidly transport and position heavy munitions. In the cavernous bays, they identified the silhouettes of ballistic missiles and Nor anti-ship cruise missiles, mounted on mobile transporter erector launchers ready to be wheeled to hidden firing shafts. Even more alarming were the subterranean docks. The Revolutionary Guard had carved tunnels that sloped directly down to sea-level blast doors, opening underwater into the Persian Gulf. Resting in these pens were fleets of Zulfikar unmanned surface vessels, autonomous, explosive-laden speedboat drones designed to swarm and sink massive oil tankers. Stacked along the walls were hundreds of Shahed series suicide drones, waiting to be launched from rails to overwhelm regional air defense networks. As the SEALs moved to plant thermobaric and shaped demolition charges on the missile rails and drone pens, an Iranian security patrol rounded the corner. In a fraction of a second, the subterranean silence was shattered by the chaotic eruption of close-quarters combat. The physics of fighting inside a crystalline halite dome instantly generated a lethal acoustic nightmare. The compressional wave velocity of sound traveling through solid rock salt was over 4 kilometers per second. The salt walls did not absorb sound. They reflected it with near-perfect, violent efficiency. When a weapon was fired, the rapidly expanding gases of the muzzle blast and the supersonic shockwave of the bullet breaking the sound barrier slammed into the crystalline walls and bounced back. In the enclosed space of the tunnel, these overlapping shockwaves merged into a continuous deafening roar. The acoustic overpressure became a physical entity, a brutal concussive force that punched the operators in the chest, disoriented the inner ear, and threatened to rupture eardrums even through advanced dual-layer electronic hearing protection. To mitigate this acoustic terror and maintain tactical communication, the SEALs were armed with specialized short-barreled rifles chambered in the 300 AAC Blackout cartridge. Designed specifically for suppressed close-quarters combat, the Blackout utilized a massive 220-grain bullet. Fired at subsonic velocities, roughly 1,000 feet per second, the heavy projectile never broke the sound barrier, entirely eliminating the supersonic ballistic crack that caused so much auditory devastation in confined spaces. At the extremely close ranges of the tunnel firefight, the massive kinetic energy of the heavy round ensured immediate threat neutralization. However, the heavy mass and slow speed of the subsonic bullet introduced a uniquely terrifying hazard in the salt caves: the ricochet. When a standard high-velocity rifle round struck a surface as hard and unyielding as crystalline halite, the sheer kinetic energy usually caused the copper and led to spall and disintegrate into harmless dust. But the heavy, slow-moving subsonic bullet behaved entirely differently. It possessed too much structural integrity to shatter. When a SEAL fired and the bullet grazed the rock-salt wall at a shallow angle of incidence, it deflected. The violent impact deformed the bullet asymmetrically and entirely disrupted the gyroscopic stability imparted by the rifle's barrel. According to the laws of rotational dynamics, the bullet could not maintain its original spin. Instead, it began to tumble wildly, spinning uncontrollably on a precessing axis as it caromed down the narrow corridor. As this jagged, deformed chunk of lead and copper tore through the enclosed airspace, its multiple asymmetrical facets aggressively disturbed the air. The severe air drag acting on the tumbling metal generated a horrific, high-pitched whistling and whirring noise that sounded exactly like a massive, angry bumblebee zipping past their heads in the pitch black. The lethal geometry of the cave dictated that every missed shot instantly transformed into a humming, unpredictable saw blade bouncing off the walls, floor, and ceiling. Enduring the stifling heat, the deafening overpressure, and the terrifying hum of ricocheting lead, the SEALs systematically fought their way through the cavernous bays. They moved with fluid, practiced lethality, neutralizing the guards and slapping magnetic-shaped charges onto the hulls of the unmanned surface vessels and the guidance packages of the ballistic missiles. Communication during the chaos was maintained not by standard radios, which could not penetrate the rock, but by through-the-earth magnetic induction transmitters. These specialized devices pushed ultra-low frequency magnetic signals directly through the solid strata of the Earth, allowing the subterranean element to transmit short, compressed data bursts to the airborne commanders fighting on the surface. With the charges set and the timers ticking down, the SEALs initiated a rapid, tactical withdrawal, bounding back through the suffocating humidity and the crunching salt crusts of the Namaqdan cave, racing against the impending detonation. On the surface, the sky above the Strait of Hormuz began to bleed with the pale, bruised light of dawn. The paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne Division had held the line. The rocky beaches along the Clarence Strait were littered with the burning wreckage of Revolutionary Guard fast attack craft and the shattered remnants of the Iranian infantry assault. The waters of the mangroves were slick with fuel and debris. The perimeter was secure. High above the island, the heavy drone of turboprop engines signaled the arrival of the C-130 Hercules aircraft, banking hard to begin their descent onto the newly captured runways, bringing with them the heavy armor and logistical lifelines required to solidify the American occupation of the island. Suddenly, the jagged ground beneath the paratroopers heaves violently. A deep, muffled seismic shudder rippled across the entirety of Qeshm Island, followed seconds later by a concussive thump that echoed up from the bedrock. Deep within the diapiric salt dome, the synchronized explosives had detonated. The blasts tore through the stored rocket propellant and the warheads of the anti-ship cruise missiles, triggering a catastrophic chain reaction of secondary explosions that ripped through the subterranean bays. The tremendous internal overpressure blew out the sea-level blast doors, sending a geyser of fire, concrete, and pulverized salt rock erupting into the waters of the Persian Gulf. The structural integrity of the bored tunnels failed, and hundreds of thousands of tons of rock salt collapsed inward, utterly annihilating the unmanned surface vessels, the suicide drones, and the ballistic missile launchers. The dual-domain operation achieved total synchronization. By seizing the surface topography and repelling the mainland reinforcements, the airborne infantry successfully blinded the island's external defenses and secured a staging ground. By braving the technological and geomechanical horrors of the Salt Cave, the naval special warfare element successfully decapitated the enemy's asymmetric strike capabilities from within. The unsinkable aircraft carrier had been gutted. As the sun rose over the Persian Gulf, illuminating the burning waters of the Clarence Strait and the smoke drifting from the collapsed sea doors of the Namaqdan Cave, the grip on the Strait of Hormuz was finally broken.